The lights in the lecture hall dimmed the moment Instructor Ythsara raised her hand, and every cadet in the room felt the shift in the air before a single image appeared. I did not know, in that exact second, that my life was about to split into two parts. The part before I saw those blades, and the part after. My name is Ethan Cole, and I was the only human in a class of 40 cadets from 11 different worlds. I had gotten used to being watched, used to being the strange one, the soft one, the one whose species had barely stepped past its own solar system, while the rest of the galaxy had already mapped 1,000 stars. I sat in the third row, between a Velk cadet named Draza and a quiet Osuni girl called Miri, and I kept my head down most days, because the less attention I drew, the easier the semester went. That day, none of that mattered anymore. Instructor Ythsara was Kiran, tall and thin, with skin the color of dark rust and eyes that never seemed to blink. She taught Xenoarchaeology of Warfare, a class most cadets took because it was easy credit. We looked at old weapons from dead cultures, wrote a report, and moved on. Nobody expected anything from that class. Not real danger, not real weight, just old metal and old stories from species long gone. Today, she said, her voice flat and even, the way it always was, we look at something unusual, a discovery with no match in any database. No language record, no genetic trace remaining on site. A culture erased so completely that only its weapons speak for it. The hologram flickered to life above the center platform. 3 objects turned slowly in the blue light. A curved blade, short and sharp, its edge worn, but still holding a shape I would know anywhere. A longer piece, leaf-shaped, with a groove running down its center, and a smaller blade, hooked near the tip, with markings carved into the handle that had survived centuries of dirt and rust. My chest went tight before my mind caught up with why. Around me, the other cadets leaned forward with mild curiosity, the way you look at a puzzle that does not concern you. Draza tilted his head. Miri took notes without looking up. Nobody else in that room felt what I felt, because nobody else in that room recognized what they were looking at. I recognized it immediately. Every line, every curve, every small imperfection in the forging. The dig site, Instructor Ythsara continued, is catalogued only as Site 941. A barren world, radiation levels high enough to have ended any biological life within a few centuries of the disaster that struck it. No standing structures remained, no records, only bones, buried deep enough to survive the surface conditions, and these blades, found beside them. She turned the image slowly. The blades rotated, catching invisible light. We call this a fascinating dead end, she said, and for the first time in the entire semester, I heard something like genuine curiosity in her voice. An extinct culture, unknown, with a weapon tradition unlike anything on record. Whoever they were, they are gone. Their world took their names with it. I stopped writing. I did not notice at first. My hand simply stopped moving across the tablet, and the words I had been typing sat unfinished, cut off in the middle of a sentence. I stared at the hologram, and the rest of the classroom noise faded into something distant, like sound underwater. Draza noticed before anyone else. He leaned toward me, his 4 eyes narrowing with the particular concern only Velk cadets seemed capable of showing. "Ethan," he whispered, "you have gone still." I did not answer him. I could not yet. My eyes were fixed on the smaller blade, the one with the hook near the tip, the one with markings carved into its handle. I knew those markings, not the exact words, because the language had shifted over centuries, but the shape of them, the rhythm of them. I had seen markings like that carved into a memorial wall back on Earth, in a small town most people had never heard of, a town my grandmother used to talk about before she passed. Miri glanced over, her notes forgotten. "Cadet Cole, are you well?" The whole room had noticed by then. 40 pairs of eyes, most of them alien in shape and color, turned toward the one human in the room who had gone from quiet to completely silent. Instructor Ythsara paused the rotation of the hologram and looked at me directly. Her flat expression did not change, but there was a question in it now. "Cadet Cole," she said, "you have a reaction to this material." I found my voice, though it came out thinner than I wanted. "Instructor, Can I see the catalog coordinates for Site 941? A murmur passed through the room. Requesting raw data mid-lecture was not common. Most cadets simply absorbed what they were given and moved on to the next slide. But Ythsara studied me for a long moment, then nodded once and pulled up the coordinates beside the rotating blades. I did not need to read them twice. I had seen those numbers before, buried in an old family record my father kept, a record most people in my generation had stopped bothering to check, a distant colony marker, a name that had not been spoken aloud in my family for 3 generations, because there had been nothing left to say about it. A world called Halden's Reach, settled centuries ago by a group of colonists who left Earth with nothing but hope and the tools they could carry, and who were lost when a solar event tore through their unshielded outpost before any rescue could reach them. Lost. Not just to time. Lost to record. The Earth of that century had been recovering from its own troubles, its own wars, its own disasters, and somewhere in the noise of rebuilding, an entire colony had slipped through the cracks of history. No one came looking. No one wrote their story. They simply stopped being mentioned, the way a name stops appearing in conversation, until one day, nobody remembers to say it at all. "Instructor," I said, and my voice steadied now, though something inside my chest had cracked open and would not close again. "This is not an unknown culture." The room went completely silent. "These are human blades." Ythsara tilted her head, the closest Akiran came to showing surprise. "Cadet Cole, the genetic material recovered from the site, does not match any registered human colony in the regional database." "Because it was never registered," I said. "Or it was, and the record was lost when the colony died. Humans do not always keep perfect records, Instructor. Not the way your species does. We lose things, whole towns, whole worlds sometimes, when there is no one left to speak for them." I stood up. I do not remember deciding to stand, but I found myself on my feet, staring at the rotating hologram like it was a mirror, pointed at something I had never expected to see reflected back at me. "May I approach the display?" Ythsara studied me a moment longer, then stepped back and gestured toward the platform. I walked down the aisle between the seats, aware of every eye following me, aware that I had never in my life felt so exposed and so certain at the same time. Up close, the hologram was more detailed than it had appeared from my seat. I could see the wear patterns on the curved blade, the small nicks along its edge that spoke of years of use rather than a single event. I could see the leaf-shaped blade had a maker's mark near the hilt, faint but present, a symbol I recognized from old family photographs of tools my grandmother had shown me once, tools that had belonged to her own grandmother before her. And the smaller blade, the one with the hook, the one with the carved handle. I reached out, my hand passing harmlessly through the projected light, tracing the shape of the markings without touching anything real. "These are not random cuts," I said quietly, more to myself than to the class. "This is writing. An old script, one that fell out of use even on Earth long before most of the galaxy ever heard our name. It was used by a specific region, a specific people, mostly for personal items. Wedding gifts, memorial pieces, things meant to be kept, not sold." "Can you read it?" Ythsara asked. I shook my head slowly. "Not fully. It changed too much over the centuries, and I only know fragments, things my grandmother taught me before she passed. But I can tell you what this pattern means." I pointed to a repeating symbol near the base of the handle. "This is a mourning mark. It means the blade was carved after someone was lost, not before, in preparation for something, after, as a way of remembering." The classroom, usually filled with the quiet shuffle of 40 different species settling into their seats, had gone completely still. Even Draza, who fidgeted through nearly every lecture, sat frozen, watching me with all 4 eyes. "These people did not vanish quietly," I said, and my voice cracked slightly on the last word, though I pushed through it. "They knew what was happening to them. They had time to carve markings into metal before the end came. They had time to remember someone, or several someones, before the radiation took the rest." I looked at Ythsara. "This was not a dead end, Instructor. This was a grave. And it has been sitting in a database for who knows how long, labeled as unknown, extinct, forgotten, because nobody who found it, knew how to listen to what it was saying. The instructor was quiet for a long moment. In all my time in her class, I had never seen her without an immediate answer ready. Now she simply looked at the hologram, then back at me, and something in her rigid posture softened, just slightly. "How certain are you of this identification, Cadet Cole?" "Completely," I said. "My family kept a record of a lost colony called Halden's Reach. The coordinates match. The timeline matches. My grandmother used to tell me stories about it, about people who left Earth hoping to build something new, and were never heard from again. I always thought it was just a story, a sad old family tale, with no real proof behind it." I gestured at the blades. "This is the proof. This is them." A cadet near the back, a thrall named Corin, raised a clawed hand. "Instructor, if this is correct, does this change the classification of the site?" "It changes everything about the site," Ythsara said, and for the first time her voice carried something beyond flat academic interest. There was weight in it now, something close to regret. "We have been studying this location as an archaeological curiosity for years, cataloging weapons, measuring metal composition, documenting corrosion patterns." She paused, and in all that time, no one thought to ask a human what they were looking at. The words landed heavier than she probably intended, but I did not correct her. She was right. The galaxy had cataloged my people's dead, and never once bothered to ask if anyone remembered their names. "Cadet Cole," she said, "what would you have us do with this information?" I thought about it, standing there in front of 40 cadets from 11 worlds, none of whom had ever heard of Halden's Reach, none of whom would have thought twice about a barren rock cataloged under a number instead of a name. I thought about my grandmother, and the way her voice used to soften whenever she mentioned the colony, like she was speaking about family she had never met, but somehow still missed. "Send the coordinates to Earth," I said, "to the Colonial Records Office. Let them cross-reference it against the old lists. There are historians who spend their whole lives trying to find colonies like this one, trying to close gaps in the record so families can finally know what happened to relatives they lost track of centuries ago. Let them do their work. Let the dead have their names back." Ythsara nodded slowly. "And the artifacts themselves?" "Send those too," I said. "They do not belong in a display case labeled Unknown Culture. They belong with people who can read what is left of the language, who can honor what the markings mean, instead of just measuring how corroded the metal has become." The room stayed quiet for a long moment after that. Then Miri, who rarely spoke unless called on, raised her hand. "Instructor, if I may, this changes how I think about the entire course. How many other sites in the archive are labeled unknown or extinct, simply because nobody in the original survey team recognized what they were looking at?" Ythsara did not answer right away. She looked at the rotating blades, still turning slowly above the platform, catching the light in a way that almost looked gentle now instead of clinical. "That," she said quietly, "may be a question worth investigating for the rest of the semester." I returned to my seat, my legs feeling strangely unsteady, though nothing physical had happened to me at all. Draza leaned over as I sat down. "You did not tell us your family had a story like that," he said, not unkindly, just curious, in the straightforward way Velk cadets often were. "I did not know it was true," I admitted. "I always thought it was just something my grandmother said, to make an old sad story feel less pointless. Something to hold on to, because there was nothing else left to hold. And now I know it was real," I said. "Now I know they mattered enough that someone marked their loss into metal instead of just letting it disappear." The lecture continued after that, though nothing about the rest of the class felt routine anymore. Ythsara pulled up other artifacts from the archive, but her tone had changed, careful now, less certain of the labels she had trusted for years. She asked the class more questions than she gave answers, and more than once she looked toward me, silently checking whether something in the images matched anything in the stories my grandmother had once told a boy who never expected to need them. When the class finally ended, cadets filed out around me, murmuring to each other in a dozen different languages, but several of them paused beside my seat before leaving. Corin placed a clawed hand briefly on the edge of my desk, a gesture I later learned was a sign of respect among his people. Miri simply said, "Thank you for speaking," and left without waiting for a reply. Draza remained behind with me as the room emptied. You carried something heavy today, he said. I did not know I was carrying it until it showed up on a screen, I said. I thought that story died with my grandmother. I thought no one would ever prove it, and it would just become one more thing my family forgot how to talk about. But it did not die, Draza said. You remembered it. And because you remembered, an entire people who were forgotten by history are about to have their name returned to them. I looked back at the empty platform where the hologram had rotated only minutes earlier, now dark and still. That is the strange thing about memory, I said. It does not need an entire species to survive. Sometimes it only needs one person who refuses to let go of it, even when everyone else has already moved on. Instructor Ythsara approached as the last of the cadets left the hall. She studied me for a long moment, her expression unreadable in the way most Kiran expressions were to human eyes, but her voice, when she spoke, was gentler than I had ever heard it. I have taught this course for 11 years, Cadet Cole. I have shown thousands of artifacts to thousands of students, weapons from cultures long gone, presented as curiosities, as puzzles to be solved, and then forgotten again once the lecture ends. She paused. Today, for the first time, one of those puzzles looked back and told me its own name. They were not a puzzle, I said. They were people. They just needed someone who remembered them enough to say so. She nodded slowly, then turned back toward the now empty platform where the artifacts had rotated only minutes before. I will file the request to Earth's Colonial Records Office tonight, she said, and I will make certain your name is attached to the discovery, Cadet Cole. It is only fair that the person who returned them their name should be remembered alongside them. I did not know what to say to that, so I simply nodded and gathered my things, my hands still faintly unsteady from everything the last hour had unearthed inside me. Walking out of that lecture hall, I understood something I had never fully grasped before. The galaxy was vast, full of forgotten worlds and forgotten peoples, and most of them would likely stay that way forever, buried under catalog numbers and academic curiosity, waiting for someone who never came. But every so often, if the universe allowed it, someone walked into a room who still remembered. Someone who had been told an old story by someone who loved them, and who carried that story forward long after everyone else had let it fade. That day, I learned that memory itself could be a kind of rescue, not loud, not dramatic. Just one voice in a quiet room, refusing to let a name disappear completely, even centuries after the people who once carried it were gone. And somewhere, far across the stars, on a barren world once marked only by a number, the wind that still moved across its empty ground would, before long, finally know what to call the bones it had been guarding all along.